Picture a wild tailgate party in early 1989. Thousands of college kids are drinking beer, setting off fireworks, and chanting in unison. They aren't celebrating a football championship. They are waiting for a man to be electrocuted. Outside the Florida State Penitentiary, the crowd wore commemorative T-shirts, held up mocking signs, and cheered the demise of America's most infamous serial predator. You probably know the Hollywood version of this story, the myth of the handsome, brilliant law student who charmed his way into the lives of dozens of women, driving a tan Volkswagen Beetle across the country. Pop culture has painted him as an evil genius, a mastermind who outsmarted the police for years. But the reality is far more disturbing. He wasn't a genius at all. He was a highly organized, compulsive predator who exploited a massive blind spot in law enforcement. And shockingly, the story didn't end in 1989. As recently as the summer of 2024, investigators were still excavating Utah mountainsides, desperately searching for the remains of women he discarded half a century ago. Even the forensic science used to finally convict him has recently been completely debunked. In 2023, the National Institute of Standards and Technology released a massive report declaring that the bite mark evidence used to send him to the electric chair was actually scientifically invalid. He was definitely guilty, without a doubt, but the systems that caught him were deeply flawed. To truly understand how this man operated, we have to look past the charming facade. We have to understand the deep psychological fractures that created a monster capable of hiding in plain sight.
His story begins in a Vermont home for unwed mothers. Born in 1946, his arrival brought immense social shame to his young, unmarried mother. To protect the family's reputation in a conservative era, they constructed an elaborate, life-altering lie. He was raised to believe his grandparents were his parents and that his biological mother was actually his older sister. Growing up in this environment of hidden truths, he developed a profound sense of detachment. When he eventually discovered his true parentage, it shattered his understanding of his own identity. But the darkness was already taking root. Family members recalled chilling incidents from his childhood. When he was just 3 years old, his aunt woke up in the middle of the night to find kitchen knives carefully arranged around her body underneath the bed covers. The toddler was simply standing by the bed, smiling silently in the shadows. By adolescence, his behavior grew even more alarming. He dug hidden tiger traps in the local woods, lining the bottom with sharpened wooden spikes. When a neighborhood girl fell in and severely injured her leg, he showed absolutely no remorse. Modern criminologists have analyzed his psychological profile using the Hare Psychopathy checklist. He scored an incredibly high 39 out of 40, indicating a total absence of human empathy masked by glib, superficial charm. Interestingly, after his execution, scientists examined his brain for tumors or physical damage. They found its physical structure was completely normal. The evil wasn't a visible medical defect, it was a deeply ingrained psychological void. Many experts now believe his violence started much earlier than his official confessions suggest. In 1961, an 8-year-old girl named Anne Marie Burr vanished from a neighborhood where he delivered newspapers. He was only 14 at the time. While he denied involvement until his final days, modern behavioral analysts point to this disappearance as the likely genesis of his lifelong compulsion. He was learning how to hunt.
Every apex predator has an origin story. For him, the ultimate trigger wasn't just his childhood. It was a devastating blow to his fragile narcissism. During his time at the University of Washington, he became infatuated with a wealthy, sophisticated classmate. She was beautiful, came from a prominent California family, and wore her long, dark hair parted exactly down the middle. She represented the high society life he desperately craved. But after a year of dating, she abruptly ended the relationship, realizing he lacked the ambition and direction she required. That rejection completely broke his psyche. Instead of moving on, he spent the next several years meticulously reinventing himself to win her back. He transformed into a rising star in Republican politics, even attending the 1968 National Convention in Miami as a polished, suit-wearing delegate. He also volunteered at a Seattle crisis clinic, working the suicide hotline alongside Ann Rule, a former police officer who would later write his biography. She described him as empathetic and highly effective at saving lives over the telephone. This reveals his terrifying ability to compartmentalize. He could play the savior by day while his dark compulsions consumed him at night. By 1973, his reinvention was complete. He reconnected with the woman who had rejected him, showing off his new political connections and law school plans. He successfully charmed her into discussing marriage, and then, in a calculated act of psychological revenge, he abruptly cut off all contact and ghosted her entirely. He had proven he was good enough for her, only so he could be the one to throw her away. Shortly after this final vindictive discard, the unprecedented string of disappearances began, and almost every single victim shared a striking resemblance to the wealthy brunette who had broken his heart.
The year 1974 marked the beginning of an absolute nightmare across the Pacific Northwest. Brilliant, attractive young women started vanishing from college campuses and crowded public spaces. He wasn't hunting in the shadows of back alleys. He was operating in broad daylight, using a highly effective psychological lure. He would often wear a fake plaster cast on his arm, or hobble around on aluminum crutches, struggling to carry a stack of heavy law books. He preyed on the natural human instinct for compassion. When a young woman offered to help him to his car, he would lead her to his tan Volkswagen Beetle. The passenger seat had been intentionally removed to make it easier to hide an unconscious body. His audacity reached its peak in July of 1974 at Lake Sammamish State Park. Surrounded by 40,000 weekend beachgoers, he approached multiple women wearing a white tennis outfit and a fake sling on his arm. He introduced himself using his real first name, asking for help loading a non-existent sailboat. He abducted 2 different women from that crowded park on the exact same afternoon. He was able to get away with this staggering volume of crime because he exploited a massive flaw in the justice system. Before the internet and centralized FBI databases, police departments were like isolated islands. Detectives in Washington had no idea what was happening in neighboring Oregon or Utah. Criminologists call this phenomenon linkage blindness. He acted as a boat moving freely between these islands, crossing state lines whenever the local heat got too intense. The scale of his violence during this period is still being uncovered today. In late 2024, the Ada County Sheriff's Office in Idaho issued a renewed public plea to identify a victim he confessed to taking in September of 1974. He claimed she was a teenage hitchhiker with a green backpack whom he discarded in the Snake River. Modern investigators are currently using advanced genealogy to finally give Snake River Jane Doe her name back. Prominent experts like criminologist Dr. Matt DeLisi now argue that his official confession of 30 victims is a massive underestimation. Based on his travel logs and missing blocks of time, researchers suggest his true count likely exceeds 100. His feeling of invincibility eventually led to a critical error. In November of 1974, he approached an 18-year-old girl named Carol Durant at a shopping mall in Utah. He didn't use the injured victim routine this time. Instead, he posed as a plainclothes police officer, claiming someone had tried to break into her vehicle. He flashed a fake badge and convinced her to get into his car to drive to the local precinct and file a report. But as he drove in the opposite direction of the police station, she realized something was horribly wrong. He suddenly pulled the car over onto a dark street, pulled out a gun, and snapped a handcuff onto her wrist. But Carol fought back with sheer, desperate adrenaline. She kicked, scratched, and clawed at his face, managing to throw herself out of the passenger door and flag down a passing vehicle. Her survival was the first major crack in his armor. She was a living eyewitness who could identify his face, his vehicle, and his exact methods. Less than a year later, a Utah Highway Patrol sergeant noticed a tan Volkswagen driving suspiciously through a suburb in the early hours of the morning. When the officer finally pulled the vehicle over, he noticed the missing passenger seat. A search of the car revealed a terrifying collection of items. Inside a gym bag, police found a crowbar, a ski mask, a mask made from pantyhose, heavy rope, and handcuffs. It was a meticulously assembled kill kit. He tried to explain it away as standard burglary tools, but the police knew they had caught a predator. Carol Durant bravely picked him out of a police lineup, leading to his first major criminal conviction for kidnapping. While he sat in a Utah prison, investigators began connecting the dots across state lines. They matched his credit card receipts to a Colorado murder, and they found hairs in his vehicle matching multiple victims. Decades later, in 2019, modern DNA testing would confirm that a piece of bone found on a Utah mountain belonged to Deborah Kent, a teenager who vanished the exact same night Carol Durant escaped. The net was finally closing around him. But the justice system vastly underestimated his determination.
How does a maximum security system lose its most dangerous inmate? Not just once, but twice in a single year. It speaks to his overwhelming delusional narcissism. He truly believed he was smarter than every judge, every detective, and every prison guard in the country. After being extradited to Colorado to face murder charges, he successfully petitioned the court to act as his own lawyer. This legal maneuver allowed him to appear in court without heavy shackles or handcuffs. During a recess at the Pitkin County Courthouse, he asked to use the law library to prepare his defense. Left alone for just a few minutes, he opened a second-story window and leaped 25 feet to the ground below, sprinting toward the nearby mountains. He spent 6 miserable days freezing and starving in the wilderness before police captured him driving a stolen vehicle. You would think the authorities would lock him in a dungeon after such a brazen escape attempt. Instead, they placed him in a small county jail in Glenwood Springs. He immediately began planning his next move. He intentionally starved himself, losing over 30 pounds until he was dangerously thin. On New Year's Eve, while the guards were distracted, he removed a light fixture in the ceiling of his cell. He squeezed his emaciated body into the narrow crawl space, slithering through the ductwork like a snake until he dropped down into the jailer's private apartment. He simply put on a set of civilian clothes, walked out the front door, and vanished into the snowy night. By the time the guards realized his bed was stuffed with books, he was already boarding a flight to Chicago. The FBI immediately placed him on the 10 most wanted list. But he was completely untethered now, driven by a starving compulsion that had been caged for years. He made his way down to Tallahassee, Florida, renting a room near a massive university campus. The organized, calculating predator was gone. What emerged in Florida was a chaotic, disorganized monster.
In the early hours of January 15, 1978, he entered the Chi Omega sorority house through a broken back door. He didn't use charm, fake casts, or careful manipulation. He picked up a heavy piece of oak firewood from the yard and unleashed an explosion of absolute rage. Moving silently from room to room in the dark, he violently bludgeoned 4 sleeping college students, taking the lives of 2 and leaving the others with severe injuries. The attack was so frenzied and brutal that seasoned detectives were physically shaken by the crime scene. He fled the sorority house, but his violent urge wasn't satisfied. Just blocks away, he broke into a duplex apartment and savagely attacked a dance student, leaving her with permanent, career-ending injuries. This sudden escalation showed his psychological unraveling. The mask of sanity had completely slipped off. Less than a month later, he committed his most disturbing crime. He abducted 12-year-old Kimberly Leach from the campus of her junior high school in broad daylight. He forced her into a stolen white van, ending her young life and hiding her remains in a state park. His sloppy, chaotic behavior finally caught up with him. Driving a stolen vehicle near the Alabama border, a Pensacola police officer ran his license plates. When the officer pulled him over, a violent struggle ensued. He kicked the officer's legs out and tried to run, but the patrolman managed to tackle him to the pavement and secure the handcuffs. When they searched the stolen vehicle, they found multiple stolen credit cards and fake IDs. At first, he refused to give the police his real name. Sitting in the back of the patrol cruiser, knowing his years of terror were finally over, he quietly muttered to the arresting officer that he wished they had just shot him on the spot.
His murder trials in Florida became a massive media spectacle. It was the first nationally televised trial in American history. Acting as his own defense attorney once again, he paced the courtroom in a sharp suit and a bow tie, cross-examining the very police officers who investigated him. He even used a legal loophole to marry his devoted girlfriend while she was testifying on the witness stand. The courtroom gallery was packed with young women, a bizarre phenomenon that psychologists call hybristophilia. It's a dangerous psychological attraction to violent criminals. We are still dealing with this exact same issue today. In 2024, the murder trial of Wade Wilson exploded on TikTok, with thousands of users romanticizing a brutal killer simply because they found his mugshot attractive. Society hasn't developed an immunity to charming predators. We've just given them digital platforms. Despite his courtroom theatrics, the jury saw right through him. He was sentenced to death multiple times over. But the most fascinating part of his conviction is the evidence that ultimately sealed his fate. The prosecution relied heavily on forensic dentistry, matching his teeth to a bite mark left on a victim at the sorority. At the time, they claimed it was as accurate as a fingerprint, but modern science has completely dismantled that theory. The 2023 NIST report confirmed that human skin distorts and dental patterns are nowhere near unique enough to secure a definitive conviction. While there is absolutely zero doubt about his guilt, the fact remains that the most notorious killer in history was sent to the electric chair based on junk science. He spent his final days desperately trying to trade information for a stay of execution, finally confessing to 30 murders. But time ran out on January 24, 1989. His legacy is a terrifying reminder that true evil doesn't always look like a monster hiding in the shadows. Sometimes it looks like a well-dressed law student offering a polite smile in the middle of a crowded park. What do you think is the most dangerous misconception we still have about serial predators today? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below.